All right, we have a panel that's going to talk to you. I love the title of this discussion, Winning Back Our Country. The panel is going to be led by, of course, Emmett. We're going to reintroduce Emmett. Why don't you come on up here, Emmett? And he's also going to be joined by Anne-Marie Banfield, a great New Hampshire hero, one of not only New Hampshire's leading educational experts, but also someone who is cherished around the country as well. So Anne-Marie Banfield, Cornerstone Policy Research Action. And Jamie Gass from he's the Education Director, Pioneer Institute in Boston. Jamie? And they're going to be talking to you about winning back our country as it relates to education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And it really is an honor to be here. We're going to try to make this brief and succinct. And this is all about the federal overreach. What's happening in education is happening in department after department after department. And that's, in short, that bureaucrats in Washington, driven by special interests, are making the decisions. Those decisions get pushed down into the states. In education, they get pushed into the schools, and they do so without really state legislative consent. What happens is the state executives they turn away from the people, they look to the federal executive, and they take orders and money from the federal executive. They become more loyal to the federal executive than to the state legislature. So it's a perversion of our system. Let's start with Jamie Gass from Pioneer Institute in Boston. And Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Common Core, how that system was designed?
Sure. So first of all, I want to thank Emmett and the folks at APP. This has really been a terrific event, and I have really enjoyed working with him over the last 4 or 5 years on this Common Core issue. And also want to thank Anne-Marie Banfield, who has done really just a tremendous job here in New Hampshire, going back several years, getting folks aware of what it is that Common Core is all about. So what Common Core is, and many of you folks know about it, is a set of national English and math standards that were developed by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Those are two organizations that, while they proclaim to represent states, in fact they don't. They represent the membership that is the governors and the state commissioners of each state. And really in about 2007 or so, these sort of loose sort of advocates of national standards and national tests that have been kicking around Washington, D.C. for decades finally found their moment. And that moment came with the Obama administration's Race to the Top, a $4.3 billion competition sponsored by the federal government that was intended to basically get states to sign on to their agenda items in exchange for competing for the money. And given the fact that states were fiscally beleaguered at the time, they found a lot of takers. In fact, 40-some-odd states gradually adopted. In Pioneer Institute, where I work, given that Massachusetts had seen really historic results in the last 20 years or so under education reform, we thought that Massachusetts had a lot to lose. Frankly, New Hampshire had a lot to lose, too. In the 20 years that I've been around K-12 education, most of the states were aspiring to be New Hampshire, because for that 20-year period of time, New Hampshire had really been number one in the country. Well, Massachusetts had made a lot of gains under education reform with high academic standards in English, math, science, and history, and charter schools and a variety of other high-stakes tests. And that's really what catapulted us to number one. So we thought we better look at the academic quality of Common Core, the legality, and the cost. And I'll kind of summarize it with this. The folks who are driving Common Core have never done standards before. And while they claim that they were going to be emulating the best standards in places like Massachusetts and Texas and in Minnesota and California, in fact, they ignored all the evidence. They cut the classic literature, poetry, and drama that was the secret to the Massachusetts success. They ignored the evidence from all the high standards, high-performing states and countries that have access to Algebra 1 in the 8th grade and really kind of top out at what they call Algebra 2 light. And then there are these 3 federal laws that they basically have brushed aside. 2 of them were signed by Lyndon Johnson and President Carter, hardly what you'd call Tea Party presidents, that prohibit the federal government from funding, directing, or validating national standards and tests, right? So they brush aside the federal laws. And sort of the last piece of research we looked at was the cost, because in spite of the fact that 40-some-odd states adopted, in spite of the fact that there would seem to be kind of widespread support in 2010, most of the governors, most of the state budget offices, most of the Department of Education, the boards of education, and the state legislatures never did a cost analysis. Our cost analysis told us basically it's a $16 billion unfunded mandate from the U.S. Department of Education. For Massachusetts, my state, it's going to be $350 million to align our standards and our tests with qualitatively lower standards. New Hampshire, you're lucky, it's only about $100 million, right? And the thing that's stunning to me about this is that the U.S. Department of Education and the players around this, they haven't improved student achievement anywhere in the last 20 years, right? So they have this belief that if we have national standards and tests, that it'll catapult student achievement. The country just to the north of us, Canada, the country we probably have the most in common with in terms of legal traditions and culturally, they don't even have a national Department of Education. It's all the decision making is based by the provinces. That really used to be the model in this country, and I think if we're talking about restoring federalism, or we're talking about taking our country back from unelected bureaucrats and trade groups making decisions that control what's taught in our classrooms, that is a good place to start. We need to get rid of the Common Core, and we need to begin to show these folks that we are directing our own destinies, not waiting for bureaucrats to drive it for us.
And Marie, why don't you talk about the quality of the Common Core and what it means to children here in New Hampshire?
Well, I think, first of all, if you're a parent, you've probably seen some homework come home, and you're probably going, I can't figure out how can my child figure this out. So I think what's waking up a lot of parents is that the fact that it's coming home and it's on their kitchen table. So we're seeing it in the curriculum, and you know, you'll hear people say, well, it's just about a set of standards. I can assure you, if this was just about a set of standards, you would not see the backlash that it has created amongst parents and even teachers throughout this country. What I'd like to also do is kind of give you a big picture of what this is, because Jamie does a great job of explaining the problems with the standards and the Common Core standards itself, but that's part of an entire redesign effort that's coming from the Obama administration. So you might say, you know, you might look at it and say, well, there's a problem with the standards, and you would be correct about that. But this is just a part. So it's a redesign in public education, and if you're familiar with some of the European models, Germany, for instance, it's called a workforce training model. So it's got to be dumbed down because the ultimate goal is to put kids on a track. Are they going to go to college, or are they going to go to career? And so there's a lot of information. You'll hear a lot of complaints about the data collection associated with Common Core. And this is really called a redesign in public education. It's been dubbed Common Core, but the Common Core standards are just a set of standards right now. So if I go back and forth, if I call it redesign, it's because I'm talking about the big picture. So who would trust the government to tell us where our kids should go as far as through an education system, what track that they should be on? You're going to see a lot of surveys coming out trying to gauge the character and the personality of your children. And they're going to do a lot of these what's called psychometric assessments, and that's what we have. I think, Emmett, you asked, or somebody asked earlier, maybe it was Brian asked earlier about, you know, who was aware of the Smarter Balance test that's in the school. That's the standardized test. That's the Common Core test that's in our school. It's an assessment, and an assessment is basically an assessing of your attitudes, values, and beliefs. So that's why you're seeing this uproar amongst parents who are refusing to let their child take this assessment. It's not an achievement test, the kind that we took when we were younger. So but all of it leads to putting kids on a track while they're in school. Now, some of this is still playing out. We even have some states that have passed legislation that your child has to pick a career path by the time they're like in middle school. Yeah, we've had states pass that legislation. So these are the things that, you know, that they're taking away your freedom. You know, liberal arts education, it's interesting because the money behind this is Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation. He's the one pushing Common Core. He actually argued against a liberal arts education, and Steve Jobs argued for it. But they're trying to pull in this workforce development model. So that's the big picture. So, because I think everybody sometimes gets bogged down in just the standards. We don't like the standards. But once you realize what the redesign actually means, then you can look for other things. Like we have competencies in our schools now. If you look at the U.S. Department of Education's website, they list, competencies. It sounds great. We're going to have our kids competent in these subjects. Is your child competent enough in global warming knowledge? That's basically when you hear about those things, can your child collaborate enough? Is your child creative enough? The non-academic, these are 21st century skills. Well, you need 20th century skills first. You need basics. And so you're kind of pushing those aside, the basics. So that's the problems that we're seeing with Common Core. That's the problems that the parents are seeing. Most of the teachers are angry about this. But that's I wanted to give the big picture view of that.
And I think it's a lowering of the trajectory. I mean, here in America, what's behind this practical federalism forum, the idea is the sovereignty lies with the people and remains with the people, and that we want to educate children regardless of what job or career they go into. You want them to be thinking thoughtful human beings, people of substance in their communities, who can stand and participate in their communities and be leaders in their churches, their communities, and their country.
Crop tape.